Hello, as always, Masha tells you stories and welcomes you to a new talk. I welcome those who are my lifetime supporters and those who have just joined. It has been a year since I started actively sharing content on Patreon, and besides it was a really tough year, I realized that embroidery still takes place in my life, though I practice it only just from time to time. I still go on to embrace the community of fellow enthusiasts and embroidery lovers, supporters, and just those people who find interest in the creation of needle and thread. I hope that you find my tutorials interesting, resourceful, therapeutic, especially because I find them therapeutic. So sometimes they really move me. So to realize lots of things about natural history, about the history of art and craft, about the history of people. So I appreciate the stories that you share with me. So your creative way and your creative practice. So it's so much encouraging and so much fulfilling. And it's so much cute because I really understand that there are lots of people who share one love all over the world. So besides of creative techniques that we do and we keep our hands busy, so we also have lots of things that somehow unite the creative practice, so of different nations, of different countries and different cultures. So, the work that I feel special that I'm going to discuss today is the dimensional embroidery. But a part of it, I really feel pleasure to welcome you today in my home because nowadays it really becomes more like a real home. So and it's really hard work. So and especially I find it really cozy feeling. Find a very cozy feeling in it because it looks like we're not just somewhere far away from one another, but it really gives me a feeling that we're sitting here together and we're watching pictures from maybe centuries ago and from different countries. And somehow it really becomes a very uniting mood and kind of like uniting and pleasant feeling that I really want to highlight. So, because especially today's topic is about the tradition of embroidery, some particular tradition that lots of people share all over the world, I find it really interesting to discuss, to demonstrate, and somehow to highlight how it was developed. So, especially its history and abundant particularities and different expressions. So, being raised over the surface, dimensional embroidery takes a kind of like superposition among other kinds of embroidery. And it gives a chance to travel back in time, for example, to the Middle Ages and to the Elizabethan England and France during the period of the Renaissance. And here, in this like voyaging in time, we can really find lots of interesting things, some kind of like feast for our creative eyes. And as always, for a starter, I have found a quote that belongs to John Burroughs. So who said like to find new things, so take a path you took yesterday. And I feel it like this is exactly what we are doing today. So Dale Burroughs was an ultimate naturalist, and many of his ideas can be applied in the sphere of natural world. So I think that this is very interesting and curious thing that we also can take as a good motivating thing, a good motivating quote. So to discover textiles, because many things that embroidery enthusiasts use today open a kind of like a secret path, presenting ideas that many have forgotten. And so it really can be a pure delight for our imagination. So lots of things that anyone can find in embroidery of many artists, in different countries, can really give us a sort of reminder about like antique things, about antique works of like needle and thread, especially like dimensional embroidery, gold work embroidery, that somehow utilizes the approaches of padding the surface, of constructing it a bit higher than ordinary plain one. And especially, so what I find really attractive about dimensional embroidery is just the way that sometimes people try to emphasize that they were the pioneer of this type of needlecraft. And it's fascinating that, just if we observe it from east to the west, or maybe from north to the south, we can also find out that embroidery really had a really dramatic history. Because any avid lover of it can be inspired by this majestic beauty. And this type of experimentation, like dimensional experimentation, can also be found in many countries. And especially if we want to observe this way of in the retrospection. So I think it would be really important to understand how it was developing, because lots of countries state that they were the first. So especially if we look at really far distant past, we can find out that, for example, in Byzantine, so people also used some sort of like padding and some sort of like manipulation of constructing dimensional surface. So that's why, well, maybe Byzantines could really state that they were the pioneers of high relief embroidery. So, and maybe, so this is a way that embroidery really came to life, came to the realization in past. So, but otherwise, there were some other countries, especially in the Arabic world, like Algeria and Morocco, who were also just stating that. So somehow they were the creators of this idea. They were creators of this dimensional way of approaching to 3D embroidery. So, but actually, the particularities of Moroccan and Algerian embroidery is that primarily it was practiced by men. So, they were creating lots of beautiful things, utilizing gold and silver thread, coating over the genuine leather padding. Well, and especially in the Elizabethan England, so there was a very exquisite way of organizing the surface, especially embroidery surface, because it was the period when embroidery was not used primarily as a way of decorating clothes and gowns and robes and so different types of clothes and accessories, but also it just bursted in interior design, and it was really beautiful way to decorate interior and different types of interior decorations. Well, especially in Bourgeois France, men really had very high standards of dress, and especially women, so had really even the high ones. And especially upon the present times, especially until the present time, many people consider Paris to be the cradle of global fashion, especially in terms of incredibly stylish embroidery that they can realize. And I feel it just like, well, France is also just the first in the embroidery, but actually, well, maybe. So it could be really disputable. But how about the neighboring countries, especially Spain? So because typically, El Arte de Bordado Lorco, or Mediterranean Baroque style, features lavish needlework using gold and silk on a red velvet base. And some embroidery artworks were used in ceremonies, especially, well, just incredibly beautiful. So somehow they were reminding us the maybe church embroidery, but so they also had a kind of differences, because typically, they were done so in gold and silver, but afterwards they were cut and used as an appliques. So especially the traditional costumes for matadors. So they're also embellished with 3D embroidery and these type of appliques or organized a bit high in relief. Well, and especially in ancient Rus. So here we have the Ivan the Terrible. So lots of Russian craftsmen used the sewing tradition, applying various approaches on constructing the base and the surface, using different types of fabric, textiles, and embellishing it with precious and semi-precious stones. So to decorate beautiful caftans and gowns and many examples of Tsar's wardrobe. Well, but actually there is an evidence brought by historians that birthplace of dimensional embroidery that, well, actually afterwards was transformed in the way that we understand it now is in Asia. So, and thanks to cultural exchange and thanks to the trade, so this technique spread over the world and over the neighboring countries. So adopting some techniques, like some particularities and some maybe traditional needlecrafts. So while gathering the material for this presentation, I really just tried to follow some plan, and actually I was lost, completely lost while thinking about how it would be better to organize everything. So how to organize the storytelling. And since there are lots of various actually approaches to the dimensional embroidery in many countries, I really had trouble with organizing, maybe arranging them according to some kind of like system. So, and I thought that it would be really better to imagine that we're just time traveling and, well, to use the chronological approach and to imagine that we're just traveling from east to west, from north to south. And while we're just trying to discover some particular things and now let's just imagine that we are floating over a timeline that opens us various countries and continents where we can meet fantastic works. Well, and we discover them, observe them, and somehow we learn about them, their values, about the people who created this, and good times and hard times of people who did the incredible works of embroidery. And now let's just imagine that we see the legendary Silk Road, so which crossed the continents, and especially it originated in Asia, and so afterwards it led people to Europe and Africa. It was a network of trade routes, and actually it originated in China, and the Silk Road traversed Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan in Central Asia, and then it unrolled its way through Iran and Iraq and Syria, and it linked Turkey with Europe. And this famous ancient trade route also spanned southwards into India and Arabian Peninsula, and it passed through Mecca and Medina, and people over this Silk Road, so they were very different. And actually, though they shared some traditional techniques, they kept their hands busy with lots of textile activities. So they embroidered, they weaved, so they colored the textiles, they cut the threads, and afterwards they weaved textiles out of these threads. And they experienced the craft just the same way as we do today. So, and actually, I think that we can learn a lot about their perception and the use of the textile that they actually utilized. And among the earliest sites found by archaeologists dated back to the 12th century, originated in Iran and Iraq during the period of Seljuk Sultanate. Embroidery art that you can observe in this picture, so really just demonstrate a traditional pictorial and kind of like geometrical pattern typical for Persian, Islamic, and Central Asia elements. So if we just dive into the way it was realized, we can see that the background is just a textile, so which is just a blend of silk and cotton, and above the surface there is a slight couching, so made with silver and golden threads. So it looks a bit dimensional, so it looks a bit padded. So, and the base of this idea, that really the artist wanted to put into this embroidery. So it was the embellishment for some religious costume, the embellishment for the religious piece that people used for some sort of ceremonies. So actually, this type of embroidery called tiras, and any kind of embroidery at this time in Persian region was called tiras. So because it was the idea of embellished textile. So, and among the techniques, we can also spot satin stitch and couching stitch that we use maybe usually in a very ordinary day. So both known among the just well-practiced or maybe just starting embroiderers. And a couching stitch in particular is tradition not only for the Asian countries, but also it can be found in countries in the East. So and somehow it really gives us an idea that maybe from the eastern part of the world, it traveled to Europe and to other European countries just because of the exchange of cultural exchange in the Silk Road. Well, now let's see another thing. So if we just try to discover something in the neighboring countries, we also can spot here a very familiar method of textile manipulation, so and transformation of the surface. So, and this is a piece from the 12th or maybe 13th century, and so it is typical in the Islamic culture to use the symbol of the star. So this is just the octagram represented as two overlapping squares. So this was the typical symbol used in plans for buildings in the Islamic world and in Byzantine as well. And it was used as a very decorative and like traditional elements for coins, tiles, jewelry, and textile as well. So here we see how this visual, like graphic element, so becomes the embellishment of the textile piece. So there is a frame made of coral cords and golden cords. They are couched and placed on the surface of satin embroidery. Actually, it's possible to see this work if you're really curious about it in London, in the Victoria and Albert Museum, in the old collection of it. So, and somehow it really gives us a push to go further. So, because if we go to Europe and somehow try to dive into the root of Italian embroidery, that can also just stretch back in history to the 13th century. So, we also can trace some origins of the dimensional embroidery there, because, well, there are ancient civilization of Etruscans that thrived in what's now just called like a modern day Italy. And actually, somehow we, through the remindings of their art craft and their creative practice, we can also discover lots of things that unite the history and the history of textile, the mythology, and so the way that people use decorative elements to to speak about the values, to speak about the interests. So, and here we see the mitre that was originated from the 13th century, and I feel it just like a good expression, an absolutely beautiful expression of mixed media work, because there is a combination of raised embroidery, just in the way that we know it, and there are lots of like beautiful thing sewn on incrustation and rhinestones. So, and there are also some sort of like ornamental elements, so made in enamel, so that feature apostles. And somehow it really gives us a sort of feeling that somehow we also have already seen this type of decoration in modern ways, so in our just modern life, especially if we see the way that haute couture things were created. We can also spot that maybe the artists of nowadays also apply this type of techniques in their creations. Well, and actually, the next example also just originated from Italy. So this is just incredibly beautiful example of dimensional embroidery. So, which is ornate or fay. So, and this is an ecclesiastical vestment worn during the ceremonies in Catholic Church. And there is a figure of Christ on the cross with an attendant on its base. So, actually, on the bigger picture, it's impossible to see it, but there is a person. And actually, Christ himself is realized in textile, especially it is a figure constructed of textile, and afterwards it is covered with silk threads. And it's just like incredibly, amazingly lifelike. And while personally, when I have found it for the first time, I could not really believe my eyes that it was done lots of just 100 years before, because it looks like a very modern and very just classical way of using threads and needle to create the dimensional embroidery. Well, the next one is a piece from Hungary, and it is an ode of dragon. So it actually was an ode of chivalry founded in the 15th century. So in order to uphold the Christianity against Turks, it was an order that encouraged people so to promote their ideas widely and for their good service. So they were granted with this order. So and actually, this badge is done in the old ornate Italian shading technique. And the colored threads that catch the golden threads, they are made, actually, they are colored green. And the whole impression is just very real because, well, the surface, which serves the base like for this dragon, so just like the construction of it. So it is formed from cotton cords, and each wrinkle, each thorn, and even eyelids of this dragon. So it really very dimensional. So it looks incredibly real, and especially for this time. And on top of it, there is a golden thread, so which is couched with a colored thread. So that really gives this order a kind of like a soft cotton heart and very shiny metal skin. Well, the next piece is from the 16th century, and this is a portrait of Queen Elizabeth I. So anyone knows that, well, just everyone knows actually, that England is the pioneer of embroidery. So it can really be called with pride, a pioneer of embroidery, especially if we just see how Jacobean embroidery in Jacobean era and Tudor's era were realized in art and crafts. So we can also state with confidence that, well, these epoch were just like a big turning moment. So, but actually, if we see how Queen Elizabeth I was dressed, so we can also realize that she was very brilliant in the way that she chose the craftsmen who created clothes for her. Well, and actually, if we see the details, so of these beautiful dimensional embroidery, so known as Devery bodies, we can see that it was just like a new word in the royal fashion. So actually, so there is nothing known, or maybe not much known about the wardrobe that really stayed alive from the period of the Queen Elizabeth, because it is known that just only one reminding has left. But actually, the scientists from the Kyoto Costume Institute have another point of view, and they have found that the Devery bodies that you can see in front of you now, so which are kind of like a bodies with accompanied skirt, and actually skirt is missing, belonged to Queen Elizabeth I. So, and actually, this piece was granted to the Queen by Lettice Knollys, so the mother of Robert Devereux, and actually the name of these bodies, Devereux bodies. So he was second Earl of Essex, and previously he was a favorite of Queen. So, and actually, somehow it was stated that he was executed for betrayal, and his mom, in a huge hope, tried to secure a pardon for her son, and especially she tried to organize a gift, special gift for the queen in order to protect her child. So, and these pieces really demonstrate a kind of like a cry for security, and maybe so this just like a pure expression of love was a way to maybe somehow to save a life of a person. And actually, if we just see how this piece was realized, we can see that so just the surface is very plain. It is made of linen or maybe canvas, and the entire surface is just completely covered with lots of embroidery plants, insects, reptiles, and many other creatures. And actually, if we see the way that the embroidery realized, we find it really truly dimensional quality. It's just fantastic. And at some point, it's just like a new way of perceiving embroidery, especially gold work, because it really changes the surface and the bodice looks just like a blossoming flower. So, and those attentive eyes that can see the way it was realized in technical way can really spot some typical approaches which were common for needlework and needle lace, typical in France, Italy, Greece. And somehow we feel it like this method looks like Riticella or Riticella work. And I think it, well, just like an incredible thing that somehow we can use it for inspiration. Well, the next piece is from Germany. So it's a big wall hanging, so which originated in the mid 16th century in Germany, and maybe it was a tendency in Europe so to apply this method of dimensional embroidery in many things, and especially lots of artists tried to utilize it, and especially this piece was created in Bohemia. So now we can just observe the way that it was manufactured. So because this fireplace hanging, or maybe decorative hanging, so about like 3 meters long, and it is made from a kind of like precious materials. So because it is made of silk, gold, and some elements that somehow just a kind of like weapon elements. They are also made of just precious materials. The embroidered figures are stuffed, and somehow they look like bisected puppets. So maybe just like a semi-sculptural elements, and especially their shape and maybe the look that they have really remind us the real personage, or maybe the real body of people. So, and it's really incredible to observe the way that the artist applied their skill in order to realize their maybe imagination in material. Well, the next piece is just incredible. Well, because, well, no words can explain it. And it was made in the 16th century in Sweden. So this is a horse harness embroidered with gold, and just like a exceptional piece from Swedish royal treasury. So because it was made for ceremony of marriage of Charles XI and Ulrika Eleanor of Denmark. It contains saddle of amazing beauty and with lots of tiny details and well, just like impossible to spot all of them, to name all of them, because it's just the relief embroidery made in gold and it is laid over a woolen padding. So the main color is medium gold and a little bit tarnished silver, but actually the motifs feature flowers, leaves, and line figures with voluminous heads and paws. And in the middle of it, there are lots of elements which also just remind us some mythological creatures. So, especially the mascarons, so big, large masks that open as a decorated relief in the form of human face. So, which somehow combines some animalistic traits. Especially mascarons initially a kind of like scary, sacred things, because at first they were used in antique Greece as a protective symbols in temples, and especially the heads of lions having just black eyes made of crystals and glass beads. They also have a very spiritual element, or maybe very spiritual meaning. So, in order just somehow to protect the ceremony of marriage, so that these pieces were originally made for. Well, and when I first came across of this piece, I could not really believe that it was made in the 17th century and that artisans possessed a skill so to realize this work in the material, because it looks like a sort of like architectural piece. It looks like a kind of like stone carving, and it's really impossible to imagine how just having a very minimal toolkit and minimal type of materials, meaning the minimal quantity of materials, they could realize it. But actually, this saddle blanket really remind me of a very rich and beautiful tradition that originated from Spain, especially so the ceremony that takes and it takes place annually in Spain. So Paso Encarnada, so a religious parade in Lorca. So actually, Lorca is considered to be the Spain goldwork embroidery cradle. So and lots of embroidery pieces, which actually used by people in every year parade. So they're on the display of the city museum. Well, and somehow, if we just try to think about Spanish embroidery, so somehow we associate it with black work, but not only black work embroidery is typical for Spanish embroidery, because lots of silk shading and lots of just big pictures that somehow framed in these dimensional golden and silver frames. They feature the scenes from the Bible, and are also the very special way of treating embroidery as a kind of like uniting activity of generations of families and lots of people who practice this antique craft. So, and somehow, embroidery is not particular for Spanish people as the decorative element for ceremonies, because, Spanish sites of attractions, they also just have a very specific, maybe not even specific, but somehow very special way of treating the traditions, especially for Spain. So, and for many people, embroidery is also, like Spanish embroidery, is also a synonym for corrida and for bullfighting, because matador suits are also just an expression of pure love for embroidery. Especially the name of this suit typically can also have a name as a kind of like a costume of lights, because a bullfighter should be really bright on the Aryan and among the other people. So it also should be very. I have forgotten the word bright. So he should be shiny in order to reflect the color of the sun, and it should sparkle in order to attract the bull. So that's why the suits of light is just representation of idea that people wanted to put into this costume and into this idea through the years and through the centuries. Well, but actually the meaning behind the embroidery is also very deep. As I have mentioned while observing the saddle blanket. So, because they're also just the combination of mythology and the story that unites the idea of realizing the embroidery. So, for Spanish costumes of matadors, so mythological background and the use of colors, the use of elements, the use of different shapes is also very important, because the artists who realize this work, they also put lots of ideas, just trying to make the costume a kind of puzzle. And while embroidering every element, they also apply the technique that I have already told you about. So it's not just like embroidering the surface the way that we actually got used to embroidery. So just putting all things together in one piece, but actually, so they cut everything and embroider everything separately, and afterwards they assemble a big picture of just small parts. Well, somehow it's very alike the way that many of us do brooches or other accessories. So, firstly, stitching them in one just frame, and afterwards cutting them out and assembling it in one piece. Well, so the next country so that we go to is France. So everyone know for its just particular role in the world of fashion. So because typically France is associated for Le Petit Monde and La Maison de Luxe. So and actually, so that is really incredible thing about like France crafting power, because the 18th century was very remarkable, because it's just like coming next. So not very remarkable for popularization of embroidery techniques that came, for example, from Germany. So the one that we have already observed, and especially from Spain. So they just like found a nice place where to bloom together. So, but actually for developing the tradition that was particular for France. So it was very nice to take something from each cultural approach to embroidery in order to realize and to create something in particular, something special. So here we see the example of very antique French embroidery, so which is realized in silk, on silk background. And actually in the middle there is sun, and all over it there is a frame which also a bit padded, and it's also a bit dimensional, and somehow we feel the effect of it, because the padded surface also gives us a special shine. And somehow it really reminds us the costumes of military men that really was popular in France in the 18th century, and especially the beautiful dresses that females adored. So embroidered with floral patterns, with beautiful ornamental elements, so realized in silk with some golden accents. Well, and the next, also a piece that somehow highlights the ecclesiastical embroidery. So because it features religious symbols, and it also has kind of like the narration of some beautiful ideas put into practice while embroidering, while the artist was embroidering this design. So because this piece is executed in fine ivory colored silk, and the pattern is made with layers of linen thread and covered with precious threads. So all over the frame, there is a needle lace, which is made in metallic thread. And anyone can state that this piece was made maybe by a very advanced embroiderer who gave this work really magnificent look. But actually, we feel it just like it's really nice to see, and somehow to maybe capture some elements that we also can practice in our ordinary projects, in order just to give our work a little bit beauty, a little bit shine, and a little bit just maybe kind of like connection with the beautiful pieces from the past. Well, and the next is also a French piece, which has a very ceremonial accent, because it just the traditional religious mantle that features ecclesiastical embroidery, which is made on the textile, which serves a background, which is a blend of silk and metal threads. So, and on the front. So there is an embroidery that features a cross with very maybe a kind of untypical way of applying the dimensional way of decorating the surface, because, well, it's very specific for utilizing chenille threads and satin threads and metallic threads, and especially the shapes that this work creates. So it's very fine because, well, it's really precisely cut. So in order to cover with threads and embellish it with cabochons and brass thread, so in order to accentuate the geometry of all the elements, the curves of all the elements. And especially, I really like the way that embellishments made with precious stones and semi-precious stones is done here, because, well, it's just like a new level of applying these techniques. And I think that this piece is really remarkable for the way that, well, the sandbox embroidery is realized on it. And many other pieces can be found in, for example, in North Africa, and especially in Alger. So, and it's really hard to say whether Alger adopted this technique from France while it was the colony of France. And actually, somehow it also has something that maybe Alger is famous for, because, well, it was a place where leather skin production was really high and popular. And for padding, the beautiful embroideries called mehboud embroidery. So they also used skin and genuine leather in order to apply this as a kind of like ornamental base, and afterwards to cover it with metallic threads, and just in order to obtain a very delicate and beautiful shine. So here there is an example from the North Africa. And well, so typically it is somehow has a very strong association with Sultan's court, because there is a beautiful flower bud in the center. So it's somehow the expression of very rich cultural heritage, because this blue corset, well, totally covered with gold thread, with like wire embroidery that emphasize this beautiful tulip in the center. And the flowers and the floral patterns are just interlacing together, and there is a beautiful combination of fantastic shades on this, just on the blue background, which really plays together in tune with golden threads. And I feel it just like the padding, which is realized in leather, gets a really thick and very rigid look. And so this corset, or maybe just a kind of vest, looks very thick and very rigid. And somehow it really maybe the reason why so this piece just lived so long life. So that's why it's really important to pay attention to what materials we use. And actually, there are lots of examples of embroidery, so that somehow we can spot on this voyage. So, and maybe the techniques that somehow unite our cultures and our embroidery tradition. And many particularities in crafts that many countries share also just demonstrate their particular cultural way. And especially, there are also lots of examples of embroidery in my homeland, because raised goldwork embroidery and, well, lots of other types of embroidery can be found in Russia, and especially widely practiced in the neighboring countries. So, and I also have found that, for example, in the Balkans, there were lots of beautiful way of embellish the textile surface, especially using soutache, and well, afterwards covering it with golden threads. And also, the Ottoman Empire was very particular for the way that they practiced sarla embroidery. And for example, in the Museum of Cairo, there are numerous works of Kishwa embroidery, Kishwa wraps and robes that also speak about the way that they used ceremonial clothes in order to pay tribute to God. And especially in the Portuguese tradition of embroidery done on gold and velvet, with gold especially, was common way of embellishing just the most beautiful things, and the most beautiful robes belong to the serene house of Braganza, so during the period of the 18th century. And especially my homeland is very particular for the figurative elements of embroidery. So, but actually during the period of the 20th century, so all legacy, all the sites, or maybe even the tradition of it was ruined due to the policy of Bolsheviks. And nowadays there are a group of enthusiasts, or maybe just an embroidery lovers who still continue to discover these beautiful and somehow very special types of embroidery and somehow practice it to let it continue living. And many enthusiasts, just maybe the same as I am, so revive this tradition and try to pay attention to the race embroidery, especially pearl embroidery. But here we see an example of also ecclesiastical embroidery, and there is a mitra, so from Moscow province, so originated from the 18th century. Yeah, and if we just see how it was realized, we can also spot that somehow all the elements, they were also dimensional, and they also have a sort of base under the silver coating. And somehow I cannot really say for sure how it was realized in general, but it looks like the way that maybe Spanish artisans applied these techniques and use it into practice. So like lots of elements firstly were embroidered, and afterwards it was cut. All of them were cut and applied to the surface of the textile in order to just assemble them all together and to construct this headpiece. Well, and so though embroidery that we just observed now is very maybe specific, actually it's very particular for its religious background, I really feel a very strong resemblance with the antique works that we have already seen. So the one originated in Germany. I mean, the figures, like dimensional figures of men, which were padded and which were constructed like bisected puppets. So, but here we see not really just a full size bodies, but actually just like a sort of like relief of them. And especially so the pieces which feature the faces of these saints, so they are kind of like animal work. And so what I really like about this work is just the frame, which is made of dimensional grapes, and somehow they're wrapped in the curling elements with mesh, and it's just like a beautiful way of applying threads, like woolen threads and cardboard, in order to create a very beautiful surface. Well, the next piece also very particular for the way of using cords, because there is an example of Russian pearl embroidery, which I also really like to practice. So, but actually just like combination of the elements typical for Russia and the elements imported from abroad, because the ribbon originated from France, and just like a mixed media art because it's the mixture of typical Russian embroidery and maybe the pieces originated from other countries. Well, I feel it very special because somehow it is the way to celebrate the beauty, because, well, not always, not every day, ladies were using these accessories to decorate themselves, because it was very particular for special occasions like special celebrations and holidays and maybe weddings, to decorate your, for example, braids or maybe head with these particular things. And this type of Russian ornamental embroidery, just like a complex of very splendor and beautiful elements, because somehow it was sort of like elitary work, or maybe an elite tradition to use these very exquisite fabrics, like, for example, silk, or maybe the blend of silk and cotton. And well, all these things were used as a kind of like jewelry pieces, because for a lady to receive as a gift, this type of nakosnik, so which is a woman hair ornament, or maybe the crown embroidered with pearls, was a very luxury gift. and especially crowns, like hair ornaments of various types, or headdresses and pieces of embroidery that embellished the head of a woman, or a particular gift before wedding by a groom. So that were given to a bride for instead of like a ring that we have nowadays. Well, and now, so there is an example of Russian crown, a particular Russian crown, which also has a very specific symbolism in it, because many works that feature the traditional elements of ornamental and kind of like very maybe specific Russian design, they also has a very strong symbolism with maybe the connection with fertility, because here we have the traditional Russian kokoshnik, which is called shishak, so which features the crown made of the form of like shapes, or I don't know how to say it. So made of just pine cones, so made of dozens of rounded particles, which gives us a feeling like they are just like sort of like pine cones made of freshwater pearls and mother of pearl chips. So, and these wreath and crown, so they are just constructed both from a silk brocade and these pearl chips. So typically it was a particular thing, a particular decoration north of Moscow, because the production of pearl was in the north regions. So, but actually, all these beautiful examples of Russian dimensional embroidery also just inspired me for practicing my own pieces, my own things. And among the works that I have accomplished during like a couple of years, so there are lots of examples that feature high relief embroidery, and well, there are also some like pearl embroidery and beadwork and silk coating and gold work embroidery. And once, just following an idea of my just good friend, I thought of creating a course for faraway country, so where I just highlighted the beauty of Russian ornamental embroidery and the diversity of its techniques and tradition. But so then lockdown happened and it really changed my plan. Then war changed the plan. And now I just have this piece, which I'm going to demonstrate you now. This beautiful purple jewelry box that reminds a story. Just it gives me a reminder of a story that I made in 2019 when I tried to just realize the idea of just rolling a course. So in this embroidery just inspired me to realize some patterns which were particular in the 16th and the 17th century. So there are also some sort of like coaching technique, and there are also the example of traditional ornamental designs. And so here there are some kind of like developing of design. And so here you may see this work a bit closer. Well, there are kind of like dome elements that feature a cross symbol, which was particular for religious and church embroidery. And so there are also mesh elements that we have just observed in the frame of the icon that I have recently showed you. So they're just feeling, so made in the style of mesh. And there are also soft bullion wire and bronze glass beads and freshwater pearls that are just like drops of a morning dew. Well, and this is another story which also inspired me for another piece, because it is full of music, poetry, and history, and also the architecture. So in the city of Kursk, where I spent or maybe when I spent a huge part of my life, so there is a building remarkable for its rich history, and somehow it's a kind of like architectural piece, though it's not really protected in the way I wanted it to be protected. So, besides, it has a really somber past. It also has some kind of like a bright and beautiful stains, especially in my memory. But because, well, this building is particular for its story in 1865, when a famous Russian composer, Alexander Borodin, came there to write his well-known opera Prince Igor. And especially the facade of this three-story building, standing in the corner of just main Kursk streets. And it is somehow embellished with the pilasters, with a kind of Baroque-style elements, with plaster embellishment, and with ornate cartouche. So, and somehow it really maybe just a beautiful place in the town. And because so here, so in the mid of 90s, so I worked with my parents now nearby, just watching the windows glowing with blue because there was a hospital. And so I came to the corner of this building. So for my first date as a teenager, and also I painted this building while I studied in art school. And not far from it, my husband firstly kissed me. Then just a couple of years later, so we were walking by with a baby carriage. Then me and my daughter photographed this place from various angles using just film camera. And well, we just captured the plaster elements and this beautiful oval window on top while eating ice cream and sitting in front of it. And once I just got an idea that this building is so much inspiring, and somehow I thought that so the opera, so that Borodin wrote there, can also be a sort of like motivating thing that somehow just triggered some sentimental strings in me. And afterwards, I tried to draw the idea of Borodin's story in material. I mean, the opera of Prince Igor. So, and I call this story "The Tears of Yaroslavna." So, Yaroslavna was a wife of Prince Igor. And I tried to apply a sort of like a story into some visual expression because somehow I covered and wrapped the blue rhinestones into tarnished silver frames, which I beaded. And afterwards, I applied them into the kind of like bed or lodgement in the crown and assembled it together with the elements, which remind the shape of domes as well, that, well, I just demonstrated to you in the jewelry box. And also they somehow encrust the hearts of flowers. So there is a combination of glass beads, so framed in the white cotton cords, would also serve a kind of like dimensional base for the whole crown. Well, and here is the final look. Well, the elements that I have just told you about, like that remind the shape of dome with crystals, with chips of bullion wire, with rolled rose gold, and with lots of freshwater pearls. Well, so here is a bit closer. Yeah, here is the final look. So on the wrong side, the crown is covered with white cotton calico glued onto the cardboard. So the whole construction is very firm, it's very rigid and very stable. I hope it can really live a very long life. Well, so also there is a gift of gratitude, which I created a couple of years ago. So this is a jewelry box. And so it is also realized in the familiar technique in relief embroidery, so particular for Russian embroidery technique. So, and it really features the silhouette of a bird. So, and it also has a connection with mythology because bird is a symbol of hope, and this is a symbol of humanism somehow. And also, I shared this tutorial for my followers in Instagram. So, in the awful spring of 2022, and actually winter 2022. Because I wanted to give a supportive hand to those who need this. So during very disturbing times. So, but I think that nothing is very uniting and nothing is very like soothing, like somehow sharing the energy of creation. And that's why I tried to feature these lessons in order to give a hand of support to those who need this. Well, I think that I need to share it on my Patreon feed too. And another piece, also an example of dimensional embroidery, but so here the surface of a cord padding is not like the way it is realized in the previous work because it is filled with setting embroidery thread. So, and somehow it also the example of traditional ornamental technique and the ornament particular for the 17th century. Well, and actually the solid black shade that I use for embroidery among the materials, so the palette, because it's very like shiny, matte, glossy, and sparkling black. So it also gives a kind of like dimensional look because the whole picture doesn't really look plain. Well, and one more piece. So expression of friendship, love, and it is called like Pearl Sunrise. So if you have seen the video devoted to the bookbinding technique, so which I shared, if I'm not mistaken, in May, so I also featured this work because here there is an example of the combination of patterns traditional for needle lace, not really needle lace, but bobbin lace, particular for Russian lace technique. And so the way of using dimensional embroidery, because all the elements they firstly constructed with cords and afterwards they're covered with semi-glossy raw silk thread. So this is just like the way to say thank you to a person who somehow gave me a very supportive and very friendly handshake from across the miles. So, and this type of technique, I feel, is just like the expression of a true love. So the palette is also very natural, very typical for the materials that take place in this embroidery, because while there are just raw silk shades and also there are pale, not really gold, but somehow really just a kind of like champagne gold color. So, and I feel it like very bright at the same time, like when I put it all onto the like gray surface, and because altogether they really sound incredibly beautiful. So, and I just embrace the crystals, glass crystals into the frames, beaded of tiny glass beads. So, and so here there is a more closer look. Yeah. Yeah, I feel it just like the final picture. Well, so I also urge you somehow to learn from all the heritage that we are lucky to observe all over the miles. And somehow I hope that maybe lots of things that I shared with you today also give you a motivation to try your hand into practice in dimensional embroidery. Because sometimes while just imagining how we can actually create a dimensional surface, so we exercise our way of transforming the way that we perceive embroidery. So just imagine so how beautiful so a piece can be if you just make it not really plain, or maybe just raise it a bit higher than usual. Just maybe so we can imagine that we are creating something very special for Her Royal Highness, or maybe some sort of like ecclesiastical decoration. So maybe so we can also think about some jackets that can be embellished with dimensional embroidery. So I think it would really be a nice thing to practice, and I think that just like maybe a very useful technique that we can also apply afterwards in many of our just ordinary projects in order to give them a bit of beautiful shine, or maybe extraordinary shine. So I hope that you find my presentation interesting, and so I would really appreciate it if you share some feedback on it. And so I really thank you for watching this video up to the end. So stay safe, keep stitching, and enjoy its wonderful power. I mean, enjoy the wonderful power of embroidery. I send you my big hug, and bye bye.